All right, it's 10 o'clock here. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to give folks just a couple more minutes to join, and then we'll get started. All right, so I think the numbers are settling out, but obviously more, I'm sure, will join. Let's go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining today for this event, a live discussion with Accenture to discuss blockchain and the ROI within pharmaceutical revenue management. A couple of admin notes. Everyone should be muted for the sake of the group. And then there is a Q&A tool in Zoom at the bottom of everyone's view. If you click that, there's an easy way to post questions throughout. They will either be answered in the Q&A tool, or I will interrupt the presentation at opportune moments to propose questions on the audience's behalf. And we will also have a Q&A session at the end, so I may save questions until the end as well. So we do want this to be interactive. Please share any thoughts, questions throughout. There is a chat tool if you have any questions or if you have any comments to add there as well if needed, but try to add your questions to the Q&A tool so the group can see them as well. With that, let's go ahead and move on. Quick introductions. So my name is Mike. I lead marketing here at Chronicled. And I have the pleasure today of introducing our two panelists, Suzanne Somerville, who many of you may have heard from before here. She is our CEO here at Chronicled. And then John Squio, who is the blockchain lead at Accenture for North America. And I think that's enough for me to say. I'll leave it to them to maybe add a little bit more on in terms of introductions. Suzanne?
Great. I'd love to hand it over to John, who's going to start off with an introduction of Accenture's involvement in blockchain.
So just a little bit about myself. I'm the, as Mike said, the blockchain lead for health and life sciences in North America for Accenture. And in that role, I've had the privilege of being able to partner with some of the key consortia, actually not even North America, but globally, and really see some of the innovations that we're using with all types of multi-party systems. But one of them, of course, is powered by the capability of blockchain. And just to give you a little bit about what we're doing at Accenture, obviously we're partnered with MediLedger on their endeavors, and we're bringing some of those solutions in collaboration with other clients that are going on to this exchange that they've created. But importantly, I think a little bit about us and why it's relevant. So if I point your attention to the three focal areas, we're involved in financial services infrastructure with our blockchain capabilities, in supply chain, and with digital identity, decentralized digital identity. We support on the right there greater than 20 consortia. So we really are vendor agnostic. We engage with consortia to help facilitate the adding of new members, heavily existing members adopt the technology, and really get it holistically adopted throughout their entire organizations, which, so many of you are from very large organizations. That's very difficult to do, especially with this new formerly experimental technology, but now really moving into the production phase. And I'll just point your eyes to one last tile. This is on Wednesdays, we do paperwork. Seems a little odd, but the story behind this is that we've helped a stock exchange I'll just say in one major country of the world, really go live with the technology on blockchain. And it was a very odd statement that we were hearing. One of my colleagues was hearing from them saying, we have this enormous surge of workload happening on Wednesdays. And it's just like, well, why? You guys have some of the most advanced technology already in place long before we're modernizing with blockchain. They're like, it doesn't really matter. On Wednesdays, we still do paperwork and we have this enormous surge. And it was just so strange. It was like, wait a minute, you guys have invested massively in the best of breed technologies, and yet we still have disputes and reconciliations and all these challenges with settlements happening. And it was stunning. And I find that also exists in health and life sciences. And that's why I think we're here today to discuss some similar operating frictions. But we're not alone, because apparently it's in the financial realm as well. So I'll go ahead. Mike, would you advance or something, Susan? So just briefly, we touched on the consortia that we're involved with, and I just wanted to highlight a couple. Obviously, MediLedger in both the revenue management and fully support their supply chain roadmap as well. Some of the key ones, obviously, being the verification routing system, response for saleable returns, and the new DSCSA 2020 regulations coming out for anti-counterfeit, track and trace. And of course, the new revenue management capabilities that they have, which is very exciting. But also we're involved with many others, but a couple that are interesting, I think, to our discipline and realm of domain is known traveler digital identity. This is where we've partnered with the World Economic Forum, where you can essentially have your passports, your travel documents, basically represented digitally and in a tamper-resistant way. And Air Canada and KLM are now allowing travel using these capabilities to travel from Montreal and Toronto to Amsterdam. And that's essentially their first phase of a rollout. But this is where blockchain is really making a huge push as far as advancing decentralized identity. And then one other I'll point out is this institute's Restream Collaborative, which some of you may have heard of. But this is really interesting because it's in I would say, a parallel industry to ours, which is, insurance. Of course, there's bodily injury and different health aspects to that as well. But what we're doing here is the most simplest type of advancement. For instance, proof of insurance and first notice of loss. Believe it or not, with the massive investment in technology they've made, they still do first notice of loss and proof of insurance via telephone and fax. And so once again, we find a highly, industrialized, technology-dependent industry having one friction point or a couple friction points that could be easily advanced with some technology like this. I think that leads us to a segue to Suzanne to talk about how we're doing something similar here in life sciences.
Thanks so much, John. Just want to start by orienting you guys again on the aim of what we're doing with the work we've done with the MediLedger Network, and that is really to drive multi-company automation that, by being powered by blockchain, brings the trust to the network that can allow companies to literally do business directly with each other. If you think about it, companies do spend a lot of effort driving efficiency within their four walls. What we're hoping for is that we can enable the actual efficiency between companies, true automation. When I think of companies today, a lot of our conversation has been, hey, can your system show me that the distributor put it in their system? And the answer is you won't need to worry about that anymore, because any of the transactions of, let's say, data or information that come back to you have to meet your rules before they can be sent back. So it truly can eliminate errors and disputes. You don't have to worry about what your trading partner is doing, because the system is regulating that it's all happening like it's supposed to. When we think about processes between companies, we've talked about these before if you've seen our other webinars. Processes like, is the product authentic? Are the raw materials coming from the right supplier? Was my rebate correct? Again, these are all processes that require the exchange of data and transactions between companies. And by being able to put this rule enforcement in place, we can really automate what's going on here. Why it matters in revenue management in life sciences is probably self-evident to anyone who's in the industry, because I think there's a lot of money at stake and we have a lot of smart people in this industry. The actual flow of money and pricing is actually quite complex. there are a lot of instances where two parties are making a business agreement about some flow of revenue, and yet others are involved in the actual transaction of it. You can see here examples on the side from the chargeback discussion that we're going to talk about our solution today, to the rebates, admin fees, pharmacy claims. These are all multi-party transactions that today, frankly, have a lot of situations where rules are misaligned. There's a lot of manual effort, and there's a lot of, whether it's auditing on a good side or dispute resolution on the backside. And John just highlighted this. This is still the case in even tech-heavier industries like fintech and automotive. So this is an opportunity in this space to really drive business rule enforcement with your trading partners. And these business rules can be both between you and specific trading partners, or they could be network level business rules. The solution we've designed is able to handle both of them. This can ensure data alignment because companies are operating from the same data. They have real-time visibility to viewpoints from their partners. And from this, then we can enforce the transaction accuracy as stated, that we can ensure that a chargeback needs to meet the current pricing and eligibility, or it literally can stop at the wholesaler's door and ask them to fix it. Now, what's in it for the wholesaler is they know if they meet the eligibility and the pricing that the transaction will be honored by the manufacturer. So there's actually incentives on both sides to participate in the solution. So for today's conversation, I'm going to start. I don't know if folks on the call have seen yet, but Chronicled has issued a white paper that outlines the research we've done working with companies to understand the categories behind the errors that exist in today's chargeback process and review how a blockchain-based solution can actually eliminate a lot of those errors. Want to be clear, we're thrilled to have John and Accenture on the call, but this was a Chronicled-based white paper. If you don't have a copy of it out of today's webinar, we'll be sure to send you the link so you can access it. But I'm going to walk through these categories of errors that we found in our studies. And after I go through those, then I'm going to pass the ball over to John, who's going to talk about the work that Accenture has done evaluating the efficiencies that can be driven out of such a network-based solution as well. So the first category, starting in fourth place, is customer identity misalignment. What we've heard, and we heard from the very beginning, is the ability simply to have the trading partner know that they're talking about the same customer. This is between both the manufacturer, the wholesaler, and the GPO, so that everyone's on the same page. This becomes complicated for a couple of reasons. There are a set of industry identifiers that exist, and it could be that one trading partner uses one type of identifier and another trading partner uses a different type of identifier. As well, the information about these identifiers is constantly changing. And so as you can see here, the error codes that pop up in this category are things like customer not covered, the DEA reference invalid, and it often comes back with the fact that companies have chosen their own way to identify a customer, or they might have multiple identifiers for the same customer that they use for a different reason, and they're associated with the wrong one. What we've done in the MediLedger Network is, number one, we've integrated real-time access to the HIN, DEA, and 340B databases, so you know you're actually working from the same data as your trading partners. There are actually a couple sources of these databases that are not always in sync. And you also don't know if your trading partner is updating their systems on a Thursday and you've updated them on a Monday. With everyone aligned on real-time data, you always know that you're aligned. Secondly, we've allowed the manufacturer now to put their viewpoint of the customer that is eligible for that contract and then can map between trading partners on the available identifiers so that everyone knows that they're talking about the same customer, so that this element can be solved going forward, that the customer alignment is there. We're going to talk a little bit more about changing data, which is also a part of a problem with customers. But first, identifying that you're talking about the same customer is the first part that can be solved using the MediLedger Network or a blockchain-based network solution to solve that problem. Next up, with 18% of the errors identified related to reactive contract eligibility. So this, many people may understand, is that GPOs have very big rosters. And today, manufacturers predominantly are not able to assess all the customers on the roster because A, they haven't sold them before, and they really have no interest in managing all of those customer IDs for, frankly, 80 to 90% of customers that they would never sell to. So why would they want to manage that master data? And hence then the chargeback is rejected because a brand new customer has not confirmed, that the manufacturer has not confirmed that that customer is eligible. Well, there's a couple things that we think are really improved by using a network-based solution. First, the GPO rosters that come through can be enforced via validation rules to ensure that all the customer data is complete and accurate. A real simple example of this is a DEA number on a GPO roster is actually checked against the DEA database to ensure that it's a real DEA license and it's a valid DEA license. So the ability for a manufacturer to much more easily use this roster information to do eligibility assessment is already cleaned up before it gets to the manufacturer's door. Then with this real-time validated roster, as well as the databases that are often used to determine eligibility, whether it's the class of trade that a manufacturer uses or other eligibility criteria, they now actually have all the data at their fingertips that even if they don't want to maintain all those customer records, they can actually do an assessment against the entire roster because they're letting the computer do the work that could in the future move companies to proactive eligibility. This is, I would say, something I'm going to pitch a little bit in the future, but is really exciting. If you think about all the work that's done at companies today to do this eligibility assessment, if they could actually evaluate the entire roster quickly, frankly, in a matter of seconds, it could really improve this issue of reactive contract eligibility. But let's step back for a second and say, you know, companies are not comfortable doing that. What the solution can allow today, if a wholesaler is selling to a customer for the very first time, is the manufacturer now actually has all the tools at their fingertip to, rather than reject the chargeback can be put on hold, and the manufacturer can really rapidly, I will say again, in a matter of minutes, be able to do an eligibility assessment because all the data has been evaluated and corrected so that their eligibility assessment, their class of trade, frankly, becomes a much more rapid assessment. And that answer can get back to the wholesaler much faster, which can really improve the chargeback. So that chargeback that was put on hold now can very rapidly be put off hold and accepted. So there's a lot I think that we can do here, maybe aspirationally in the future, moving to proactive eligibility, but really even the ability to determine eligibility much faster is a step function improvement for the process for manufacturers and wholesalers alike. If I move now to the second biggest category, this is unenforced business rules. So I think this one is probably resonating with folks in the audience who do this, that oftentimes today, rules that matter to a company, whether it's data, whether that it's an identifier, all of this today can often go through, or maybe it's a misinterpretation of the EDI. Either way, these rules are not necessarily set in place, and hence the rules are not enforced. And so with our MediLedger solution, we can put in code all the rules that matter to a manufacturer or a wholesaler or even a GPO to ensure whether it's their contract terms are enforced. So for example, if your contract term is that you need to notify 2 weeks ahead of time of any pricing changes, that can be put in code and it can ensure that it can be enforced. And what's interesting, if we think of the incentivization of everybody, is this business rule is not one-sided. It's actually multi-sided. And by being able to put these business rules in place, it, number one, ensures you're getting the right data and the right chargebacks. But maybe at the same time, it's also helping highlight where you yourself might have errors in your own data so that you can rapidly fix those errors for the benefit of the process overall. So it kind of goes both ways. And frankly, we've talked to a lot of companies who are convinced, right, the errors are all on somebody else. And if that's great, if that's the case, then that's fantastic. Then this is super beneficial to them. I'll just say in real practice and in conversations, I think everyone has understood where they have their own issues with their data. And what we heard as feedback, which I thought was really enlightened, was it actually helps them shine a light in the corners of their own system to know where things need to be fixed, and it can help direct the energy on fixing that. So again, these business rule enforcement, I think, is really powerful to automate between trading partners, that everyone is getting improved data as the system is being used. And frankly, we also think it's time to replace EDI. If we think of EDI being sent from one company to another, number one, there's the opportunity to misinterpret the way that EDI is being used. And what we've understood is that the EDI standards, which frankly our solution is based on, just haven't kept up to date with how you guys do business. And the rate of pace of the EDI standard being updated isn't sufficient for what you guys want to do. Today's technology can allow you, frankly, like we said, to automate, exchange data directly with each other, real time. All of these things, frankly, are going to be so valuable to fix a lot of the timing misalignment and this business rule enforcement. So we're excited to help demonstrate how there is a better way to do business going forward. And our final category, with 42% of the errors identified, is retroactive contract updates. So a lot of chargebacks are rejected because effective dates are changed to be prior than that invoice date. Now, we understand, I will say from our early conversations, everyone said, oh, can we just all agree that no one will do any retroactive updating of contract terms? And as much as that is aspirationally valuable, what we heard repeatedly from customers is that's not real life. Contract negotiations sometimes take a longer time and requires retroactive dating. In other cases, it could be a function of companies setting up their system. So number one, by working real time, we actually think we can really drastically improve the uptake of data to eliminate the set of retroactive contract updates just because it took time. We've talked to a lot of generics manufacturers where pricing is changing frequently. This could solve that problem completely. The second part that we think is valuable to think about is the fact that we can actually automate. So if these retroactive updates still meets the business agreements and the rules between parties, even when it takes place, we can retroactively automate any chargeback corrections based on those lines so that it can all be updated automatically. And the effort and work and research isn't necessarily going to be required anymore. So this one obviously may depend on the rules you have with your trading partners, but I think there's a huge opportunity here, both again with real-time data to catch things before they have to become retroactive. And in the cases where they is a real business need, we can automate all of the cleanup and update from those chargebacks that result in retroactive contract updates. So these are a quick run through of the categories. Again, if you don't already have the report, we'll be sure to include the link in the follow-up to the webinar. And with that, I would love to pass it on to John to talk about the work and findings that Accenture has found helping companies implement the system.
Thank you, Susan. So we wanted to introduce to you some of the real opportunities here based on some evidence that we have. Accenture obviously is involved with, we have a large client base, many of them in life sciences, and we're very close to some of the work regarding chargebacks and reconciliation and disputes and settlements between pharmaceutical manufacturers and wholesalers. And in doing that work, we have some really good insights. And so the numbers that you'll see are averages, but averages within a pretty good scope and a pretty tight scope of what's really achievable here. So the project in and of itself could potentially save say a large manufacturer in the range of $9 million in labor costs is our estimate based on our data, and also somewhere in the range of 300 million in revenue leakage due to pricing and roster incomplete data or just incorrect data. Now, how would that be incorrect or incomplete? Well, as Susan had mentioned, the key here is that not everybody updates their systems simultaneously, right? Or not everybody is fetching the right information simultaneously. Oftentimes, the single source of truth that everyone relies on is what's in their own internal databases. And where this technology is going to make a big impact is where we take all of that information and the origin or the person or the organization that actually is publishing that information will publish it out, and then the organizations that are actors on this network will preemptively look to that single source of truth before they process their transactions. Now, that idea is to be able to preemptively ensure that there's corrections and that there's correct assumptions on both sides amongst both trading partners before you execute the transaction. And if there's not synchronization of what's in my system versus what I'm seeing is out there that was published by the single source of truth origin, then I'm going to proactively signal that there needs to be a correction made. And what's really interesting here is because you have different incentives of the different trading partners to actually increase the data integrity out there of what they currently see or what their other partners are seeing, it really accelerates the error correction of what everyone thinks is a single source of truth, right? So if it's eligibility rules, we're going to get those eligibility rules fixed quicker. If it's a roster that's either missing an organization or has organizations that those terms no longer apply to, then it accelerates the correction of that. And then now everyone's playing by the same rule set, which is really key. And what we're seeing is from a transaction reduction perspective, that's really getting into the range of lowering the total number of days that chargebacks are outstanding by 60 to 80% if this comes into full fruition, which we believe that it will at scale. And from a customer experience perspective, this is really where we can really reduce the types of annoying and frustrating changes that occur to invoices. Things like ad billing, rebilling, different challenges and friction that show up, whether that's AP or whatever different departments have to actually deal with this reconciliation amongst all trading partners. This is where this is going to make a huge impact. And it's right now in its origin phase. It's between manufacturers and wholesalers and of course GPOs. I see a future state where this will also include the dispensers, and even if we think a little more broadly, even hospital medical supplies could potentially benefit from a very similar foundation to what's happening with this type of reconciliation. And something's covering up my screen here. When we move over to reduced errors, we're seeing, as far as roster management time, 50 to 60% potential to reduce the amount of labor that we do just to make sure we got the right lists and that everybody's got the right terms that they should be getting, which is actually really surprising that we're still at that poor level of performance. But really the modus operandi has pretty much just to let it go, process the transaction, and then fix it on the back end. Well, what we're seeing here is obviously it's great. It's, you might be able to fix it on the back end with low cost labor, but there's a missed opportunity. If some of this continues on, you could actually begin to suffer some pretty high revenue leakage. Now, we have good systems out there, right, to catch that revenue leakage retrospectively, oftentimes in near time, and then to perform some type of clawback or invoice adjustment to be able to get that money back. The difference with what we see MediLedger trying to do is that this is error avoidance. This is before the transaction's cut and executed. We're going to catch that error. We're going to ask the network to get the right update on that single source of truth before we actually execute the transaction. And then moving over to the data integrity side, this is a stretch goal, right? But the potential from a technology perspective is there, I believe. And that is to really get to the specific, not all EDI, but the specific EDI transactions that we're talking about here, really to a net of zero amongst the trading partners that are participating in this network. And as this scales, and as we get more and more organizations utilizing this network, doing that type of preemptive and crowdsourced correction of what the single source of truth is, we do believe that we'll be able to get into this realm. And then ultimately, instead of transacting the chargeback via EDI, to actually do it on a contract via the network. So, Suzanne, did you want to comment at all on this before we move on, or is there additional insights?
Yeah, no, John, I think you highlighted it really well. And we've seen this honestly from the very first meetings we had with companies, gosh, a year and a half ago, that so much of the effort is fixing something after it broke. And you're exactly right. How can we bring the visibility far upstream in the process so everything is set up correctly well before product or money changes hands, so that it can be negotiated or reconciled, and let all of that actual money involved activities flow really smoothly. One thing you notice the number of days of chargebacks that are outstanding. I think it's a really interesting conversation that by working in real time, we could actually move the future to paying in real time. I think a lot of companies have an aversion to that. That's a little bit foreign to them. And it isn't required in the system. People can still keep their payment days associated with their current contract terms. But the fact that everyone knows it's going to get paid, and that that forecast accuracy for the financial management of companies, that alone is going to be super beneficial. Maybe in the future, they'll negotiate real-time paying, which would be super exciting, I think, for all parties involved. But even if we're not going to go there yet, just the forecast accuracy is going to be super valuable as well. Let me take you to the next slide, John.
I think we can advance to the next slide. Yeah, so briefly, we just wanted to talk about the future revenue management capabilities on a blockchain-enabled type of framework and network. You know, there's this interesting synergy that could potentially occur as we move out towards, the DSCSA requirements in 2023. When we talk about serialized shipment data, well, as pretty much all of you on this call know, chargebacks are typically executed upon invoice to the customer. And it would be very interesting, right, if once that serialized barcoded product actually moves downstream to the dispenser themselves, and ultimately potentially on medical supplies, if we ever get there, to the hospitals or consumers. And then the scanned, you could then trigger the chargeback, which is really interesting because now if you do that, you could capture that the event of receipt has occurred. So if there is a return of that product back to the wholesaler, you will increase the precision of the reverse chargeback. You'll essentially be able to automate the reverse chargeback, keeping chargebacks and reverse chargebacks much more synchronized than they are today. Value-based contracts are a very interesting opportunity. And so as we think about this is essentially reimbursement models, right, with pharmaceutical organizations and payers. This is a new way to get paid in a commercial realm, where you're actually, presenting that the drug will, or whatever therapeutic it is, will actually meet and exceed a certain control value over a certain time horizon in patients, and you're essentially guaranteeing that. And if the drug does not perform to that level of capability in that patient, then there's a rebate or a refund made to the payer. And so really this outcomes-based approach is great. It's been around for a long time, but it's been around at a pretty low scale because pharma typically executes these with payers for specific specialty therapies. Well, as we see new therapies coming in, particularly cell and gene and some others that really are going to be almost required to have demonstrative types of reimbursement arrangements, there really is no existing technologies that can scale to the magnitude and the precision that are necessary using what we've currently set up to really handle these value-based contracts with both precision and efficiency. So this is somewhere where we know some of the key pharmaceutical organizations are investing. And this is somewhere where we believe that certainly smart contracts on a blockchain network could make a big, big impact to be able to modernize that capability. And then we've talked about chargebacks. I want to move over to some of the rebate opportunities. And then I'm going to unpack one a little bit deeper on another slide. So wholesale rebates.
Or you want me to?
Oh, you can stay here for a second.
Okay.
We'll talk about wholesaler rebates, and then we'll talk about some pharmacy-specific rebates, and we'll talk about payer rebates. And we're going to talk about this kind of all in one slide and drill down onto some that we think is more initial time horizon and then kind of go out from there. Also, one I'll just touch on GPO admin fees. This one seems kind of like it makes a lot of sense on the network. I think this will take some behavioral adoption, right, to make sure that all the parties are aligned and really want this to occur. But from a technology, foundational technology perspective, we believe that this is definitely feasible on a blockchain network. I mean, much like wholesalers can essentially add their admin fee when they're requesting a chargeback. And eventually, if we think they're going to go and migrate off of EDI to do that and onto this technology, there's no reason why we couldn't also implement the GPO admin fees as well on the same signaling. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind advancing. So this is a specific slide that we wanted to get to, and we also wanted to save a lot of time for questions, which is coming up next. So this is the pharmaceutical rebate process, and we would love to get in discussions and collaborate with any of you, because we know that every process is different. So this is a vast generalization. This doesn't necessarily represent perfectly your process. So just let me caveat that right there. So in the mass generalization, we wanted to kind of just develop, cut it into 3 different layers. On the left-hand side, well, first of all, just to give you some descriptions here, the light blue is really payment flows. So these are actually settlements of money. The rebate flow is the purple dotted line, and then the product flow is the solid purple line. And on the left-hand side, this is what we traditionally think of commercial rebates. And I'm going to put this more into the Horizon 3 category because there's a tremendous amount of complexity here with the pharmaceutical benefit, the pharmacy benefit managers, and also the payers that transact into these. But suffice to say that there's really no technical reason why these couldn't essentially be accomplished utilizing smart contracts or business rules on a ledger that was secure. But I think what's in the immediate time horizon potentially as a really interesting use case is this middle column where we have coupons that are oftentimes distributed by pharma and then obviously passed out to the patient at the HCP's office, and then that patient can go and cover part of their copay at the pharmacy. And this is something we would love to collaborate with the group on and get your input, because this is somewhere where, as we've explored this with our clients and other industry experts, it just seems that there's incentive all the way around. And this particular opportunity for what's called pharmacy rebate capabilities for these coupons is just ripe for digital innovation and modernization. So you can think of GoodRx as an example of it, but that's certainly a centralized type of approach And what we're talking about here is a decentralized type of approach for taking a digital coupon and then managing that through the entire process so that pharmacies can get their rebate and get covered on that on the patient portion that coupon covered, and that pharmaceutical organizations can continue to get the benefits of providing those coupons and providing that payment relief to their patients who desperately need those therapies. And then on the promotional rebate side, this is a very standard process. I don't think that this is unique to life sciences whatsoever. This is really a functional opportunity to change how the promotional rebates are transacted between any manufacturer and any wholesaler. In this sense, this would be life sciences. So if there's promotional rebates based on sales volumes or seasonal types of opportunities to accelerate the sale of one product or the other at a particular volume level, there's no reason why we shouldn't also be able to do this using business rules on a distributed ledger. So this is the type of provocative thinking we would love to get and engage in addition to everything else on the chargebacks. And on that, I'll hand it back over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you for your perspective. I think the opportunities are great. I would definitely say in the conversations we've had for the last few years, it's been really valuable to understand how many pain points exist in the revenue management across the life science and healthcare companies. And it's exciting to see a solution going into production, which I think gives the proof point for others to realize this is possible and really opens up the opportunity to the efficiencies that you've highlighted here. With that, I'll hand it over to Mike, and John and I would love to take questions from the audience.
Great, thanks so much. I think there's definitely some questions coming in and some we've saved till the end. There's a big theme, I think, in the industry and the questions here on the webinar around customer identity. Very exciting topic. And I think to start with, it might help to clarify what we see as our role in establishing customer identity. You know, or how are we thinking about some of the discussions happening around transitioning, how, you know, maybe either away from HIN or utilizing HIN in addition to some new sort of global identification mechanisms that are being established in other working groups. You know, I think there's a lot of efforts to change how they identify customers, and I think we see ourselves involved, but maybe Suzanne can talk a little bit more about how.
That actually takes me back to a meeting that we had in the chronicled offices with all the companies. And I would say we initially had that same kind of thinking, like, wouldn't it be great to move to a universal identifier? And what was clear is the industry in the last 20 years has not come to that consensus. And we, as a chronicled and a facilitator of that conversation, we're certainly not going to be able to make that happen. So what we've done is built the system that will allow the identifiers that are used to identify customers today. And we've primarily focused on the manufacturer communicating to the GPO and the wholesaler their view of the customer, and then matching it up from there. The aspirational idea of everyone moving to the same identity, again, sounds great, but in real life practice, there are a lot of reasons companies have chosen to use the identifiers they do use. Certainly, if the industry continued to move and migrate to a single identifier, we'd be more than happy to adapt the system to accommodate it. But really, we're trying to meet the industry where they're at. And this has been part of the reason why a lot of things haven't been able to be fixed, is because trying to fix them for the whole industry takes a long time. And then even after you do, you find out that a third, 2/3 of the industry didn't follow what you thought was a really good idea. So let's take the data that exists today and let's have actually the system work for you using that data. And that's what we've designed here. I don't know, John, if you have any other experience in the quest for the perfect customer identifier. Oh, did we lose John?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
No,
Oh,
I'm here. I'm here. You know, we typically, I think that we typically think of them in two domains. One is really identifier of things, and the other one would be identifier of entities, whether that's a person or an organization. And so, you know, if we're thinking in this realm about identities and organizations, there's some really interesting things happening. And happy to connect with anybody who wants to know some of the foundational things. But there's a new consortia or a project amongst the one of the consortia called Bedrock, right? That's out there, and they're really attempting to create a utility network of trusted attestations amongst many different partners, and it's really beyond any one particular industry. It's really multi-industry domains that are participating in this, from credit card companies to large health insurance payers, banks, many others, to try to do that. The key question, I think, is whether people really want, if they see a need for it, right?
Yeah.
And in this realm, the question, I think another question related to that, as far as the person goes, if we talk about organization, is decentralized identity needed in this realm, or are they happy to use some kind of centralized system like we currently do, right, with GTINs on the actual product identifier? So I know that debate's out and it's being debated extensively, right, in the run up to DSCSA. Right now, I would say it's very early stage to figure it out, but I like MediLedger's approach in how they're going about it. I mean, there's the crawl, walk, run, and the crawl stage here is just let's get all the known identifiers into one place, so we don't have to go out and fetch them, on our own. We can get them, we know it's a fresh batch of identifiers that's currently defined. We know there's a single place to look, and everything that probably is relevant to us can be there. And if not, we can ask for it to be added. So I think that those are the key approaches right now. And I would say that, let's wait and see about how broad decentralized gets. I would lastly say that we have an enormous investment as Accenture in decentralized digital identity. And there's some really interesting use cases. I mentioned that one, known traveler digital identity. That is a huge opportunity. And I would be happy to talk to anybody about that as it relates to people as well. So.
Thank you, John. Maybe I'll just add one last thing. The other thing we found with these identifiers is because health practices actually change frequently, it does actually impact eligibility. So the fact that everyone's connected real time to these identifiers, we're actually hoping can also provide, if you could almost imagine, a crowdsourcing capability that when one entity hears about a change, it can be communicated to the network and everyone can understand the impact of those changes as near real time as possible. So there's a lot of complexities in our customer identifiers. It's more than just who are they, it's how they're changing and how that impacts eligibility for contracts. And I agree with you, John. This is a crawl, but it's a good crawl that's going to fix a big problem. And then if we can run later, we'd be thrilled to incorporate and interface with those decentralized identity solutions as well.
That's great. And I think some of the questions on this topic, I think we addressed most of them. Hopefully we did. Please clarify if we didn't. But they're asking about what are we doing, I think, as MediLedger and Accenture to sort of facilitate that conversation, or align with global standards for other how identity credentials are set up. And I think the important takeaway from Suzanne's point was that MediLedger is taking a little bit of a reactive role. I mean, this isn't something that we are trying to influence the industry as new identification mechanisms are set up and are starting to be used. We've set up the tools to easily incorporate them and integrate them so that whatever identity scheme a company chooses to use, that can be sort of mapped to any of their trading partners. But we aren't necessarily having a strong influence over the direction of how the industry is choosing to identify customers at this point. So another question was just around the term smart contracts is thrown around and blockchain a lot. Maybe what it is and what is blockchain's role in helping with establishing smart contracts, and why is it so impactful?
John, do you want to take that first and then I can follow up?
Yeah, happy to. I'm going to keep this at a very high level because I know we have all different types of disciplines here on the webinar. And at the highest level, I would say it's really a computer automated business rule set that's done with, I would say really modern type of technology. And it's, very useful to run it on top of a distributed ledger, quite frankly. But the real purpose is here is to be able to take what normally is in a human readable verbal language that as we write contracts, and really decompose that into enforceable types of business rules that can be enforced on the network. And so if you take the concept of being able to both decompose the contract that's written and agreed to by legal into computer code that's enforceable amongst trading partners and transactions, and then also being able to reconstitute that into the actual readable language, that's really the robust capability of a smart contract as it's properly utilized. Suzanne?
Yeah, I just might add the fact that it's in code and everyone can be assured that no one can change the code independently. And it can go from contract terms, like John said, or really any agreement between trading partners that, I don't know, the home appliance, right? Set it and forget it, right? That we know we agreed upon this term and we're going to put it into a smart contract. So there's code, and then none of us need to touch it or audit it or worry about it anymore. We just know that it'll be enforced every single time.
And I can say one of the really interesting things that we would love to see in the future is where, current state is where legal or whatever department you have or compliance negotiates the language. And then for business rules to be executed, this is non and smart contracts. This is how we do it today. You typically have to give that over to IT for them to now decompose that language and make business rules and ensure that that's exactly what legal has intended in that contract. And then when there's an update, that same process has to happen. It includes both time with legal and then time with IT. What we're talking about now is the ability to potentially create wizards to where legal could actually update the smart contracts in enforceable ways without having to include IT and those experts with IT. So that's a little on the aspirational side, but there's no reason why we can't make that leap and allow for some citizen or self-service administration for changes to the contract by legal and compliance themselves.
That's great. Thanks, John. Another question, one of our audience members brought up, I guess, some interesting parallels between the pharmaceutical or life science industry and the automotive industry back in the 80s, where a lot of these incentives and rebates and such flowed in kind of confusing ways, which, given the chart that's still up on the screen, I think we can agree, confusing is one term to use. But the question is, have any manufacturers indicated some similarities in what's happening today with maybe what happened in the automotive industry? And if none of us are aware of the specifics, I think the question is, what happens when you remove the confusion around pricing variability and the sources? Yeah, I think this gets back to the errors. What is causing the pricing variability and the changes and the confusion? What happens when you remove that confusion, I guess, is the question.
Right. So again, I'm going to throw this one to John, because I would say I've got less experience in the automotive industry. And my perspective is, again, because of smart people, they've constructed this and deconstructing it. There are a lot of people who are benefiting from it. So I would say it's hard to assume it's going to disappear. But John, maybe you've got better insight.
Well, I think someone's looking at my LinkedIn because someone's figured out that I used to work for Ford Motor Company, but that was on the technology side, folks. Yes, we had, and so I'm not sure what you're particularly referring to. I know we had extensive rebate capabilities on our commercial side, particularly within the distribution network amongst dealerships, but also amongst service organizations that were providing automotive service, amongst the fleets with the rental car agencies, and then just amongst upstream with our just-in-time suppliers. So yeah, very confusing, very challenging. A lot of that was promotional rebate types of transactions where we were looking for we were providing rebates to meet certain contractual levels that were time sensitive and stock sensitive, et cetera. But at the end of the day, there's friction with rebates. I would say that in pharmaceuticals, it's very interesting because there's numerous actors. I'm going to stay out of the commercial rebate side, which is really PBM and payer, which is on the left, because there is quite a bit of confusion about that. And number two, there's a lot of value to those rebates, particularly with ensuring that the drugs are getting onto formulary. The ones that are a lot more, I would say simpler as far as their process and what their function is, are the two the one in the middle and one on the right. But yes, lots of confusion, lots of pain points and opportunities to automate it and take out the potential for human error. And also it accelerates the computation of it, because a lot of these systems are based on, batch processes that may take 3 months to 4 months to compile and then produce the check to settle the payments. And when in fact, we could really make that more of a transactional or near time based types of settlements and accelerate the payments.
Great, thanks, John. That's helpful. Another question is around the analytics. Once a lot of the automation that we're talking about and might fall into the execution category is successfully happening, what else is possible, and how will it help with the planning and analytics around rebates, chargebacks, and all the revenue processes?
So I'll start. Chronicle is designing a solution based on the blockchain ethos that companies own and manage their own data. So it is run truly decentralized by the companies themselves, and Chronicle does not have access to their private data. That said, we do believe the data that will be collected in a MediLedger node could prove incredibly useful for analytics. It would then also be formatted if there's any benefit to sharing that information between parties. We believe the potential for a data marketplace directly between trading partners is also possible. But we've built our solution with open APIs. And so if there are analytics providers or existing solution providers that want to run additional analytics, that capability is there for companies or solution providers to build off of.
That's great. Yeah, I think the integrations with existing systems is a core part of the overall solution, and so there's definitely a lot of analytics and effort being done there. And I think our role is important, and there's partnerships to be had. Another question. Just maybe talk a little bit about regulation and what are we seeing in the revenue management space? Obviously, there's some very obvious things on the supply chain side. But how has that played a role in terms of adoption, and maybe even if there's something related to the pandemic that we've seen?
Well, last year, I know there was an attempt to eliminate rebates that was then retracted. I think there's been discussion with the current administration to bring it back in, but I don't know if it has any legs. John, I'd look to you to say, is there any potential regulatory moves here in with the new administration coming in that you see on the horizon?
Yeah, all to be revealed later on. I think the one thing that I do see in regulation that's happening on the commercial side of pharma is having to do with 340B. That was a very interesting opportunity, I think, to approach with a distributed ledger, and really to optimize those types of transactions, particularly how we do accumulators. With hospital inpatient drug purchases. I used to be directly involved in this when I was a hospital administrator, particularly with pharmacy, and that's a very cumbersome process between multiple parties. What we're seeing here is that there's some pretty big debates going on in that realm. I'm sure some of you are close to that, and we're seeing that maybe that particular challenge with 340B is going to be handled a different way, as manufacturers are actually looking to essentially hold back 340B discounts from providers unless they provide certain claims data. So we'll see how that evolves, but that's a place where I do think if that goes a different direction and pharmaceutical manufacturers are not allowed to take that pathway, that it probably will come in as an opportunity to leverage a distributed ledger to modernize that capability.
I know we're out of time, Mike, but I just want to piggyback on John that with manufacturers making some choices about which 340B licenses they're honoring, it's causing a fair amount of confusion. But again, with our clear, aligned communication, our solution can enable really clear direction from each manufacturer on their own individual choices, so the wholesaler can be ensured to know when that 340B price should be honored. With that, I'll let you close out, Mike.
Yeah, great. I know there's one last question I don't know if we'll have time to get to. It's just around, I think, onboarding and change management as clients are moving to this new system. I know Accenture's done some amazing work with some of our customers already. So I'm sure John would be happy to engage afterwards around specific discussions there. And obviously, we have helped a number of companies that are already testing and going to be onboarding very soon. So a lot happening in that sort of change management and figuring out how to move to this new system. But yeah, that I think wraps it up for us this time. So thank you everyone for joining. John, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And our next event will be in January. We're gonna pause for the next month or so with the holidays coming up. But we'll share details. We'll send them out closer to the event. I sent the link out in a few places in the Q&A tool. If you go to our website, we have a webinar page on there where you can see both the presentation and the recording. So it's accessible. It'll be on there by the end of the day. So thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.